Hello, everyone, and welcome to That Business Show 2.0. I'm your host, Jamie Maloney, where each weekday morning at 9 a.m., business becomes show business. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, professional, organizational leader, or just have a great story to tell, we want to hear from you. Please visit tbsinterview.com for how to come onto this program and share your story with the thousands of listeners that we have across the multiple mediums of listenership and viewership. The show goes back in one form or another 3.5, almost 4 years now, when I began my broadcasting career as the host of the Jamie Maloney Real Estate Show. At that time, I was doing a weekly program. It actually began Thursdays at 5 o'clock for a couple of months, and then moved over to Mondays at noon. And from there, did a weekly program live in studio for a year and 4 months or so, almost a year and a half, before changing the name and changing the brand into That Business Show. And I want to talk today about podcasting versus the radio, because I have experience now in both. And when I went on the radio, it was 2013. I've always loved radio, and I'm kind of sad to see the direction that radio is going with the satellite coming into play and podcasting kind of taking over. I mean, I'm a radio person. I grew up listening to rock music on the FM dial. I grew up later, I wouldn't say grew up, but when I began to work, I began listening to more of the talk programming on the AM dial. And so I'm a radio person, and I love the medium, and I always thought it would be very interesting to have a radio show. So how did I get on radio? I'm a real estate agent. I'm not trained in radio. I'm not trained in anything. Everything that I've done with this program is completely self-taught and learned through word of mouth and reading and educating and listening to my guests. A lot of times I'm learning from them, just as I hope that you are also learning from the program. And so I went on to the airwaves as a result of introduction to the Real Estate Radio Network, which was a group based in San Diego that had formed a network of real estate professionals and had come into Tampa Bay to source new real estate agents to get them on the air to develop their real estate business. Their model was pretty simple: just find real estate agents, coach them on how to get on the radio, coach them on how to host a radio show, and use the radio show to get guests that were within your sphere of influence or your network or your client base that you were looking to do business with to grow your business. And all of that had grown out of the business of a guy named Craig Sowing, who had and still has a program on San Diego-based AM radio out every evening. I think he's from 6 to 8 coastal time on, I forget the name of his radio station now. But he was a mortgage broker who had started doing a weekly show on mortgages, and he aired like Sundays at 7 a.m. on some obscure radio station who he says probably nobody listened to other than his own friends and family. But from that, he developed, it wasn't so much about building a listenership, but developing his own network. It's something that, I saw the opportunity with this program. Building a listenership and a viewership is a byproduct of really what the core goal of the program was, and that was to build his own network of real estate professionals, real estate agents, service providers that could impact his business on a daily basis. And you did that by inviting them as guests on the show, by having them be contributors to the program with regular appearances on the show. And from there, you begin to develop your own personalized network, of which he became the influencer in. And I talk so much on this program about the role of the influencer, whether it's on a small scale or it's on a grand scale. Once you become an influencer behind a network, then you can really begin to move and shake in business. And so that's what the radio show provided. And the Real Estate Radio Network had at the time probably 70 or 80 hosts when they came to Tampa. I got invited to a pitch session looking for top real estate professionals. Went there, about 12 people were in the room, listened to the person talk about why, to go on the radio to develop your business. And I just had a natural affinity to radio to begin with. And I saw radio as this huge mountain to climb, and oh wow, what does it take to start a radio show? I need all the help and support and guidance that I could get. I can imagine starting a radio show on my own. And so I enlisted the help of the Real Estate Radio Network. And essentially they were a consulting agency. I mean, I had to buy my own time on the radio. I had to do all the stuff that anybody could do without any type of representation, with the added cost of the Real Estate Radio Network. But they had tools and services that they provided. Plus they were a network in and of themselves. Other real estate agents, other mortgage brokers, title agents, real estate investors had shows, and so it was sort of a network of supporting professionals that you could bounce ideas off of, that you could hear from others how their show was doing or how not good their show was doing. And for a year and 4 months, I continued to operate through the Real Estate Radio Network, along with a couple of other local Tampa Bay-based real estate agents who also went on to become on-air hosts for the Real Estate Radio Network. That ran its course for about a year and 4 months with a weekly program every Mondays at noon after a short stint at Thursdays at 5. And I just absolutely fell in love with radio. I'd always liked listening to talk radio. I was a big fan of Coast to Coast AM when I worked my night shifts at Cargill, which became Mosaic. I was a big fan of Phil Hendry, of the morning talk shows, both Above the Love Sponge and MJ and Jack and Ted in the morning, national brands such as Drudge on Sunday nights. Tune into Glenn Beck and Rush Limbaugh sparingly, of course. Those two can be a little bit overwhelming, but that's another talking point right there. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to go on to do something greater than just once a week at this point. So a year and 4 months ran its course, and I started on 8 a.m. on February 2nd, 2015, doing That Business Show. At this point, I had dropped the Real Estate Radio Network and had went into just doing this on my own. By the way, anybody who wants to start a radio show, it's not difficult. All you do is go talk to a salesman at the local office. It's no different than buying a commercial on the radio. You're just buying time, so whatever the price is, and it's an inflated price for what you get in the radio today. And I'll talk about that here in just a moment. But it's not difficult. They'll produce the intros and the outros, and then the commercial spots are up to you to go out there and sell or record your own. And you go in there and you schedule recording time, or you can go in there and do it live. It's up to you. I always prefer live broadcasting to recorded broadcasting. One of the things I miss about the radio environment over the podcasting environment, but more on that in a little bit. And so I ran through 12:50 Monday through Fridays at 8 a.m. for a year and some months. Went to 7 to 9 in April, and then left just a few months ago. And as of now, it's June of 2017. I left in the end of January of 2017. The reason I was leaving the AM radio is it just does not offer the return that the podcasting does versus the cost that it incurs. It's very expensive to go onto the radio and buy time. It nearly broke me, to be honest with you. It's hard to get a return. It's something that I treated more as a hobby and something that I love to do, all while running my real estate business in the background. Now, I knew down the road and where I'm currently at now that I would need to shift the focus of the show to a profitable model and take sponsors and be more revenue driven than what I've been in the last 3.5 years. Last 3.5 years, the program has been basically my gift back to the community for the living that real estate afforded me. And so I used that to basically give back to the entrepreneurs in Tampa Bay. I footed the cost. Some of them paid some things through sponsorships, but it was nowhere near the entire cost of what I have invested in this broadcasting venture of mine. I continue to do it ultimately because of my love of broadcasting and the skills I think I have and what I can offer back, because and you'll hear in other episodes, for me, it's not about how much money I have. I don't consider that a measurement of success. It's how I help other people, and I'm naturally wanting to help other people, even people that have done me wrong or have done others wrong. It's like I want to help people. I'm somebody who always wants to give more than I receive. And if somebody ever gives me something and I haven't given them something back, then I feel very empty inside. I feel like I must give something in some way, and it's not necessarily a financial gift. It could be something, a service gift. It could just be anything that helps them in their life or their business. But I believe that is the ultimate measure of success, is how well that you help other people, not how much money that you amassed. As a matter of fact, I think if you've got tens of millions of dollars sitting in the bank doing nothing other than, you know, accruing interest and making money, and you're doing nothing to give back, then you're actually a poor quality individual. You're not helping a society with your money, and you're saying, well, you know, I got to have the money to protect myself against, you know, rough economic times. There's only so much money any one person needs, and this is a topic that I'll talk about in another episode, but it's important to give back. And I don't believe in any type of regulatory environment that says that you should have to give back. I don't believe in increased taxation. I don't believe it's anything. I don't like any political things. I'm actually a libertarian, which means basically leave me the hell alone. But I believe as a humanitarian, we should give back to the people in our community and give more than we receive. And so the radio show was sort of my gift back to the community. And from there, I learned about podcasting. And it wasn't until actually probably a year in that I even really began to understand what podcasting is, and that I too was a form of a podcaster. Anybody that produces any type of rarely produced episodic content, whether it's audio or video, is podcasting. And so I began to take the shows. I learned how to submit to iTunes. I've learned how to use podcast generator and host my files. And I've talked about that on the show before. And I started, you know, becoming a podcaster, although I didn't focus on the podcasting medium specifically. I was doing a radio format. And there's a difference between how you do a podcast, and there's a difference between how you do a radio show, and there's a difference between how do people listen to a radio show, and there's a difference to how do people listen to a podcast. And so I'll go into that more here in this next segment and get specifically into more so what is different about podcasting versus radio. And keep in mind, new episodes each weekday morning at 9 a.m., typically with a guest, but more and more under this new format. I'm doing more and more solo shows because I love talking about myself and my business and my own beliefs. I rarely did solo shows when I was on the radio, but under this new medium of podcasting, I'm doing many more by myself. So thatbusinessnetwork.com, new shows each weekday morning at 9 a.m. and then made available on iTunes and on YouTube. Please subscribe, please leave a review. It helps our show grow. It helps get the message of the program out to more and more people. So again, you're listening to That Business Show 2.0. I'm your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business.
Hi, welcome to Yeagers. We just want to take a minute and show you what we're all about. At Yeagers, our primary business is hardwood flooring, although we are remodelers for kitchen, bath, and general construction. We operate a fleet of shop-at-home vans that have all the flooring type products, hardwood flooring, laminate flooring, tiles, stone, what have you. So we're able to come out first with products in our vehicles and take a look at the setting, how the colors will work, and then to be able to come up with some options and ideas for you. If that's not good enough, we have a large distribution center that we inventory product and have a nice display area.
Welcome back to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business. Today I'm talking about my experience on radio and how it relates to podcasting, the differences and the advantages and the disadvantages of the different mediums, of which I want to expand on and elaborate more so in this segment versus more the history of my show there in that last segment. So radio offers, that huge credibility factor, the clout, as I used to say. All along while I was doing radio, and the cost that I put into it versus the return and the listenership that came out of it were completely lopsided. There was just no question. Any sensible business person would have probably quit doing the radio a month or probably a couple of months in, because the band that I was on was extremely expensive, did not have a natural listenership, and that's something that you really want to pay attention to if you decide to go onto a radio. Does the station have an existing natural listenership? The station that I was on, 1250 WH&Z, has no natural listenership, which means you are solely responsible for the development of your audience. Had I went on to in our market 970 WFLA, doesn't matter what time of day I would have went on, it doesn't matter how good or how bad my program was, I was guaranteed to have at least probably 5,000 natural listeners, and that's at the worst times, because that's the core station on the AM band that people are listening to. But 1250, you're responsible for developing your own audience. The trade-off between the two, of course, is cost. I could have went on 970. First off, I wouldn't have gotten a day shift on that one, because that's for their morning show talent, which is hired, and then the syndicated programs that run throughout the rest of the day. But on the weekend, I could have paid, or I paid the same amount for a daily show that I would have paid for just once a week on 970. That's 4 times the cost of the show. So that's why the trade-off. I'd rather do more and build up my own audience, which I did over time, but it was not in line with the return that I got from it or the costs that I was bearing on the program. But you need to look at the shows, station that you're going on. Is there a natural listenership? If there is not, you're going to build your own through a very slow, painstaking process, especially on AM radio, which is, in my opinion, on the way out. I've heard that new cars in the next few years are going to be built without AM radios. Millennials don't even know what AM radio is or how to find it. It's all about podcasting, which is why I ultimately made the decision and began to, in the later months of that program, set the program up more and more for a podcasting format, which is different from a radio show format. Radio differs in the way, first off, it's presented. Your listenership in a radio show is consistently changing over, meaning every 10 minutes you got a whole other set of listeners that are listening to you than the 10 minutes before. People who are listening to the radio are typically in and out of their car. They're paying attention to maybe 20 or 30% of what you're actually saying while they're doing other things, and paying attention to driving while thinking in their head about what they need to accomplish that day. Podcasts, on the other hand, are designed, or not necessarily designed, but the culture of a podcast is that you listen to it from the beginning to the end. You don't tune in and out of podcasts, because that's not how they're presented. The reason radio listenership is the way it is because how it's presented on the radio inside a car, where people flip through the dials and they're in and out of cars, in and out of traffic, in and out of paying attention. People actively seek out podcasts because they're seeking out information. People seek out radio shows because they are seeking out something to fill the void while they're in their car. And then before satellite and before podcasting, to fill the house, with some type of sound, to offset the silence. But podcasts are designed to be listened to from beginning to end, and with the sole purpose of obtaining information and or being entertained. Radio is not designed for that. So I made that mistake of doing a podcast type of show on an AM-based listening program. AM radio is much more for the baby boomer generation. The older generations are the ones who are still listening to AM. That's why if you ever listen to AM radio, you hear all the financial advisors and you hear all these retirement products that are being advertised on AM radio, because that is what the listenership of that station is. Millennials are not listening to AM radio. AM radio is not going to be around in a few years. It's being replaced by satellite, and even satellite radio is predicted to not even be here in the next several years. A lot of people are saying that Howard Stern is the only reason that satellite radio is still on the airwaves today, because he is able, the subscribership that comes from his show keeps the people, it keeps the operation at Sirius/XM employed. When he leaves, retires, or dies, there's going to be a lot of subscribers that are going to leave. There's a lot of people who are simply paying those subscription fees to hear Howard Stern. I'm not one of them. I honestly like satellite radio. I'll be honest with you, I'm not even a podcast listener. I listen to a few, but when I'm in my car, I'm a music lover. I like to listen to a lot of 80s and 90s rock, and so I spend a lot of my time on those and even the EDM channels. I do like electronic dance music. I'm not a dancer though, so a whole other part of myself there that don't want to get into that topic right now. But I do enjoy EDM music on top of rock music. But I don't listen to podcasts. I listen to the satellite radio because I enjoy the lack of commercials and the ease of listening that the satellite provides. In the future, podcasting is going to begin to probably replace both the AM radio and the satellite radio. If we could ever find, or if engineers could ever find a way, and I'm sure they probably could, it's just a matter of doing it, getting podcasts into the radio inside a car. And if there was ever any type of actual regulation on podcasts to where certain channels featured certain, podcasts, obviously you would need much more organization, because to put that on a radio would be very difficult with all the podcasts that are out there. There's no way to organize it effectively for radio as it is now, and that's a whole other talking point that I will share on this program coming up, about how iTunes rates and how iTunes puts podcasts up to be found, because they give an unfair advantage to shows that aren't even producing regularly scheduled content, shows that haven't even produced the shows in years, that are outranking shows such as my own that produce new shows every single day. So podcasting, though, is a much more intimate environment with the listener and and the host. The listeners. The listenership is much smaller than on a radio. Radio has a much broader appeal naturally, and you're going to get more people tuning in and out. But the people that are listening to you on a podcast are much more engaged. They talk about your show, and you have a much more influential audience than what you would have on the radio. And you have communities that are built up around podcasting. You have people that want to share your content with other people. Radio is one of those things you turn on and you turn off, and you don't talk about it unless you're the morning show host or so you're one of the big names out there who people talk about. But for the average Joes, podcasting has given a new medium to get out there and have our voices heard. Is it going to be spoiled by all the major players who are also starting or have started their own podcasts? The big CNN hosts and the Fox hosts and the MSNBCs. Yes, they're going to come into this space. They're already out there, and that's another thing about iTunes and other search engines for podcasts, such as Stitcher and Spreaker and Google Play, is that those shows have a natural advantage over the average Joe person who is starting a podcast. But for me, podcasting fits this format much better than the radio show. It offers a much cleaner product with a defined beginning, middle, and end, talking points that can be pre-marketed because we pre-record the program, and overall I'm much more satisfied with the podcasting space than I was with the radio space. The only thing I don't like about podcasting over the radio that I did is I'm no longer live. I miss that intimacy of being live behind the microphone. But the way I'm doing it now allows me to pre-record, pre-market the program, tell my audience what it is that we're going to hear on the live show, or the when it's initially broadcast each weekday morning on the program, and then to post market it. The live shows, I really had no idea what it is we were going to be talking about. And even on the show, I don't know a whole lot about what I'm going to talk about with the guests. I know what it is, what they're doing, and probably what we're going to talk about based on what they do, but that's not always the case. And for a lot of people, we may go into more theory behind their industry than the industry themselves. And the podcasting environment gives me a chance to pre-record this, pre-market it, and post-market it much more effectively and much cleaner. And I believe that podcasting in the coming years is going to be a much more lucrative, much more competitive, but again, a much more influential environment than what it is and has been in the past 10 years or so, since podcasting has been has been around. I first learned of podcasting in 2004, and people today are still learning about what podcasting is. A third of the people out there have listened to or even know what a podcast is. Each year it grows by about 10%. And so next 5 to 10 years, podcasters are going to become more and more into the mainstream, more and more into the homes of everyday people, hopefully more and more into the cars and not on the smartphones necessarily. Hopefully they can get into our radio somehow down in the future. But all of that will have to come about with some new technology and some new major players other than iTunes, which is currently controlling really the prevalence and the market and the distribution of the podcast. So podcasting has a lot of opportunity out there for influence, for people to get involved with, and really to find a good central player or two other than iTunes that can reward podcast hosts for doing good quality shows on a regular basis and getting them out in front of the outdated content that iTunes is still pushing upon many of the consumers when they do their search. So try it for yourself. Go to iTunes, type in a topic, and look what podcast shows come up. Look at the shows and look at some of them when they were last produced. You'll see the last episode sometimes 2, 3, 4 years ago. So why are they even coming up in the search? So it's ridiculous when there is fresh content being put out there by people each and every day. So again, how can you help the program get found in iTunes? Subscribe, leave a review, tell other people about it, share and reshare and tweet the stuff out. We do a lot of stuff posting on our business show, or I should say our That Biz Show Twitter page. Please help the program grow by retweeting those tweets and also talking about it with your friends and family. And if you'd like to come onto the program too, tbsinterview.com for more information. You've been listening to That Business Show 2.0 with your host, Jamie Maloney, where business becomes show business.